Chapter 11. Missing Pet. Nancy stood at the doorway of Ned's bedroom. He was tossing restlessly and calling Nancy's name over and over. Now and then he would mumble something she could not understand. I must find out what he's trying to tell me, she thought, and moved closer to the bed. The patient opened his eyes part way and realized that Nancy was standing beside him. He put out a hand as if to grasp hers. It was all she could do to restrain herself from taking his. She pretended not to see it, and he dropped his hand listlessly back on the bed. "Ned," she said soothingly, "everything's going to be all right. Do you want to tell me what's troubling you?" "Yes," he mumbled. "Slick Fingers probably has this. Find him, Nancy." Ned closed his eyes and fell into a deep sleep. Nancy stood pondering Ned's startling statement. What had he meant? After a few moments' thought, she decided that he figured Slick Fingers had contracted ornithosis from the diseased birds at the Thurston aviary. Ned thinks he must be lying ill somewhere and probably had a doctor. If I can only locate Slick Fingers through a hospital or a doctor, the authorities can arrest him. The question was, how far away from River Heights the parolee might be. Was he still in the area of Harper? Nancy concluded that this was likely since Slick Fingers was working against the Thurstons. Nancy glanced at her watch. It was still early afternoon. I'll drive over to Harper and inquire at the hospitals there if a Clyde O'Malley is a patient. She told Hannah Gruen her plan and said she would return as soon as possible. "It seems to me," the housekeeper remarked, "that your errand is like hunting for a needle in a haystack." Nancy smiled. "Why, Hannah, dear, you've always told me that if you have the right magnet, you can find even a needle in a haystack." Mrs. Gruen laughed heartily. "I'm glad you remembered some of my teaching." Nancy hugged her. "You have no idea how much you've really helped me in my detective work. Well, let's hope I find the needle, which, in this case, is Slick Fingers." "Watch your step," Hannah warned. Nancy nodded and began to check a telephone directory for the Harper hospitals. There were two, General and Mercy. In a few minutes, Nancy was rolling along the highway in her convertible. After entering Harper, she drove directly to General Hospital. To her disappointment, she learned that Clyde O'Malley was not a patient, nor had he visited the clinic for medical assistance. "But I've just started my search," the young detective consoled herself. "I'm not going to let one disappointment discourage me." A short time later, she came to Mercy Hospital. A sweet-looking young woman sat at the visitor's desk. "Do you wish to visit someone?" she asked, smiling. "Yes, if he's a patient here," Nancy replied, and gave the name Clyde O'Malley. The young woman consulted her roster, then shook her head. "No one by that name is here now." Nancy asked, "Would it be possible for you to find out if he stopped in your clinic during the past 3 or 4 days?" The young woman nodded and dialed an extension. After a brief conversation, she told Nancy that the man she was trying to locate had not come to the Mercy Clinic. Nancy thanked her for being so helpful and left the hospital. Across the street, she noticed a sign indicating a doctor's office. "I'll start with him and then go on to the other doctors in town, asking them if Clyde O'Malley has been to them for treatment." The young detective approached the building, pressed the doorbell, and then walked in as a small sign over the bell directed. She was surprised to find no patients waiting. A nurse, who came from an inner room, announced that the doctor would not be in for another hour. "I just stopped here," said Nancy, "to ask a question. I'm sure you can answer it." She told about her search for Clyde O'Malley, whom she suspected might have ornithosis. I'm trying to locate him. Has he been here recently?" "I think not," the nurse replied, "but I'll check and make sure." She disappeared into the inner office and returned in a few moments. "No, he hasn't consulted the doctor." Nancy asked if the woman had a list of all the doctors in town. "I should like to inquire at each office," she added. The nurse said she was sorry, but there was no printed list. "Then may I look at the classified pages in your phone book?" Nancy requested, certain that all the local physicians would be listed. Nancy took a notebook and pencil from her handbag. When the nurse brought the book, Nancy copied the names and addresses. There were 12. "I hope you find the man you're looking for," the nurse said, after the young detective had thanked her. She smiled. "Is he a special friend?" "No, just the opposite. That's why I'm trying to find him. The police are looking for Clyde O'Malley. If he should ever come in here, please call Harper headquarters." The woman looked a bit startled that such a lovely and wholesome girl would be trying to track down a criminal, but she made no comment and said goodbye. For the next hour, Nancy went from office to office. Some of the doctors worked in their own homes, others in office buildings. Finally, Nancy, very weary, looked at her list. "Only 3 more to go," she thought. "I guess Hannah will prove to be right. I'm not going to find that needle in this haystack." Nancy drove to the next address. At the doctor's office, she was surprised to be greeted by a young nurse who had been in grade school with her. "Evelyn Hatch!" she exclaimed. "So you're a nurse?" "I'm in training. I work here afternoons." "We lost track of each other after you moved to Harper," Nancy remarked. "I can't believe it! Nancy Drew! I've missed seeing you. How is everything?" "Oh, I keep busy," Nancy replied. Evelyn grinned. "Are you still doing detective work?" Nancy nodded. "That's why I'm here." "The doctor's not in just now," Evelyn told her. "Is there something I can do to help you?" Nancy told her about trying to find the man named Clyde O'Malley who might have come for treatments for ornithosis. "Was he here?" she asked hopefully. "Is he a criminal?" Evelyn asked. "Well, yes, sort of," Nancy answered. "Then I may have an interesting clue for you," Evelyn said. "There was a man in here who gave the name of Arthur Clyde. He did have ornithosis." "What did he look like?" Nancy asked. Evelyn's description fitted the wanted man. Nancy was thrilled. "Is he supposed to come back?" The nurse told her that the patient had made an appointment for the following afternoon. "It's at 4:00. "I think I'll report this to Chief Pepper," Nancy remarked. "He can assign plainclothesmen to watch your office and nab the man if he's slick fingers." "Who?" Evelyn asked. Nancy laughed. "Oh, that's Clyde O'Malley's nickname in the underworld." Evelyn wagged her head. "Nancy Drew, you're really something. When I knew you in school, you gave me the impression you would become a professional dancer, not a detective." The two chatted for a while. Then Nancy said she would go on to Harper Police Headquarters and then home. "By the way, did the man have any identifying marks on him so we could trace him more easily if he doesn't show up tomorrow?" "Yes, he did have one," Evelyn answered. "I was quite intrigued. On the top of his left arm, he had a small tattoo. It was unusual, not like any I had ever seen before." "What was it?" Nancy asked her. "A circle with a cross in it. The vertical and horizontal lines extended fully from one side of the circle to the other." Nancy caught her breath. This was the symbol used by Merv Marvel. She said nothing to Evelyn, but wondered if he and Slickfingers were pals. Then a second thought came to her. Perhaps Merv had mesmerized Slickfingers and got him to consent to the strange mark being tattooed on him. It must have been done recently, Nancy decided, because the description of him on record did not mention a tattoo. Aloud, she said, "Evelyn, this is important information. Thanks a lot. Let's try to meet again soon." "I'd love to," her old school friend replied as Nancy left. She went directly to see Chief Pepper. He greeted her with a smile and said, "I'm glad you dropped in. The fingerprints on the can of chloroform were definitely those of Slickfingers. And have you brought me a new lead on him?" The young detective puckered her mouth into a half grin and said, "Yes, I have." The chief listened attentively to her story. At the end, he commented, "Every time I hear about your latest discoveries, I admire your sleuthing ability a little more. This bit of your detective work is excellent. I'll station men to watch the doctor's office and hope we can nab Slickfingers." Nancy said, "If he doesn't show up, can't your men locate him by looking for a man with a strange tattoo?" "It's an excellent clue," the chief said. "We'll certainly use it." Nancy arose and said goodbye. As she was walking toward her car, she saw Oscar Thurston's assistant, Roush, coming toward her. She waited for him. "Oh, hello," he said. "Say, I'm certainly glad I met you." After greeting him, Nancy waited for the man to proceed. He went on to say that Cammy had phoned the Thurstons just before he had left the house. "She was terribly upset," Roush said. "Her pet wryneck, Petra, has disappeared." "What? How?" Nancy asked. "Someone must have sneaked into her room in the college dorm and opened the cage. The window was open, but there's no clue as to whether the bird got loose and flew away or was stolen." "That's a shame," said Nancy. "How long ago did this happen?" Roush said apparently it had occurred during the morning. Cammy made the discovery at lunchtime when she returned to her room after class. "She is heartbroken," Roush went on. "And more than that, she's fearful. You know Cammy thinks of that wryneck as if it were a Eurasian pal of hers. Now she's convinced she'll be jinxed. In fact," Roush went on, "she told Oscar that she has already had some bad luck." "What kind?" Nancy queried. Roush said that Cammy would not divulge what it was. Then he gazed steadfastly at Nancy and declared, "Maybe you can find out." End of chapter 11.